Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very special AIIA seminar tonight. One more reminder about your phones. Please make sure that they're turned to silent if you're in the room. My name is Tess Newton-Kane. I'm a counsellor with the AIIA Queensland, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to our event tonight, PNG at 50. What was, what is, and what comes next for Australia's nearest neighbour. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people as the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting here in Brisbane. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to all First Nations people of Australia, including any who are joining us here this evening. Now, we are extremely fortunate to have an incredible lineup of panellists tonight to offer reflections on Papua New Guinea's 50th anniversary of independence. First of all, to my immediate left, Dr. Irene Simos will be moderating this discussion. Dr. Simos is a Manus and Bougainville woman from Papua New Guinea. She has more than 15 years' experience in public health research, teaching and learning in Papua New Guinea. Irene has participated, led and coordinated forums and symposia dealing with climate change, water, sanitation and hygiene, women's leadership and politics in Papua New Guinea and Australia. So it's great to have Irene joining us this evening, and I'd particularly like to thank her for taking over from my colleague Kiri Ingram, who unfortunately wasn't able to take on the moderating role this evening. I'm also very pleased to welcome back my very good friend Sean Dorney, a great legend of the Pacific. He has been feted, honoured, detained, shot at and deported in the course of a 40-year career as a PNG correspondent and then Pacific correspondent for the ABC. 4 decades of reporting based on truth, rigour, integrity and fairness. He arrived in PNG in 1974, a year before the country gained independence, to work for the newly established Local Broadcasting Commission. He was 23 years old and had been seconded from the ABC in Townsville. In this first 3-year stint in the country, he met local broadcaster Pauline Nare, who would become his wife, and we're very privileged to have Pauline here with us as well. Dorney represented PNG in rugby league in 1975, and the following year, he captained the side in his last game for the Camels. Sean is the only foreign correspondent to have been both deported and awarded honours by the PNG government. He has enjoyed virtually ambassadorial recognition among Pacific leaders who trust his judgment and analysis, as well as the fearlessness and fairness of his reporting. Sean also has a number of prestigious awards, 2 Walkley Awards, a member of the Order of Australia. He was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia for his distinguished service to Australia-PNG relations. He was recognised as a Fellow of the AIIA in 2018, and the Walkley Foundation has created the Sean Dorney Grant for Pacific Journalism in his name. We are very grateful to have you here with us tonight, Sean. I personally thank you very much for taking up this invitation. Our second panellist is, well done for beating the traffic. Well, our second panellist is another good friend of mine, Dulciana Samare Brash, a senior political advisor with a wealth of experience advising senior PNG parliamentary leaders within the major political parties on both sides of the political spectrum. Dulciana has degrees in political science and law and has over 20 years of development, media, diplomacy, technical advisory experience, having worked across the political, policy and programme spectrum in PNG, the Pacific and the Indo-Pacific region. She is a regular public speaker with focus on promoting PNG national unity, democratic institutional reforms, international relations, domestic and foreign investment, sustainable growth, climate, livelihoods and well-being of women, girls and youth. Dulciana has been a political candidate both for the Pangu Party and as an independent, and is the engagement lead for the Michael Samare Foundation. Welcome. Thank you, Dulciana. And our third panellist is Sean Jacobs. Sean is a PNG-born Australian writer and government relations and public policy specialist. He has worked with all levels of government in Australia, New Zealand, Fiji and PNG, and provides regular commentary and analysis in various publications and in media on strategic issues and the Pacific. He is the author of 3 books and is currently a Griffith Asia Institute Industry Fellow. He holds a BA in International Relations and a Master of Business Administration from Griffith University. Welcome, Sean. And to all of our speakers tonight, we're extremely lucky to have this level of expertise all in the one room with us. Our panel, guided by Dr. Irene, will speak until about 6:40 p.m, and then there will be time for questions from the audience. Without further ado, Dr. Irene, the floor is yours.
Oh, welcome everyone once again to this panel. Before we start, I too would like to extend my acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered here today, and extend your invitation to all Indigenous people. As the topic mentions, PNG at 50, what was, what is, and what comes next for Australia's nearest neighbour. So this year has marked 50 years of independence for Papua New Guinea. It brings with it a sense of nostalgia, pride, and nation, reaffirming PNG ways and values, strengthening kinship and connection, showcasing our art, cultures, traditions, licensing, and cultural exchanges amidst a rapidly growing dependent population where there are leadership and governance gaps and opportunities in economic participation and social welfare and well-being. The past does shape the future, and how we have been part of that nation building being. So I'd like to start with Sean Doro. What are you most fond about having been part of nation building and connection to PNG, pre-independence PNG?
It was an exceptional privilege to be there. At the time, I was working for the National Broadcasting Commission in Papua New Guinea on secondment from the ABC, and I had the marvellous sort of opportunity of covering all of those independence celebrations. And it's hard to believe that that was now 50 years ago. And I think there were many people at that stage who wondered whether Papua New Guinea would last 10 years, let alone 50 years, because there were a lot of skeptics about how could this country that speaks so many languages, that is so diverse, so unpredictable, how on earth could it survive? But the reality is it did. And it has survived for 50 years. And I can't claim to be a current day expert on anything going on in PNG, because I haven't been reporting for a few years. But I think it's a magnificent achievement that Papua New Guinea has reached 50 years in a quite remarkable state, considering the skeptics that there were around about the time of independence.
Thanks, Sean. A leading on that, having that close connection to PNG and just coming back into like the past and PNG's constitution that was written by our founding fathers, Dr. John Monis and Grand Chief Michael Somare. I would like to pose this question to Dalciana. What are you most proud of the people of PNG achieving 50 years of independence despite the skeptics?
Thank you. What a great question, and honestly, have you got a few days? We've just celebrated the best independence, to date. And the skeptics were really, anticipating because we'd seen, some challenges just before, and at various levels there have been quite a few challenges, whether it's institutional, socio-economic, socio-cultural. But I think, this last independence was really heavily broached in everyone taking a deep breath and really understanding that actually in a short period of time, we've actually fit quite a lot in. And over, such diversity, we've got an autonomous region, which is always, at the top of the list of challenges but opportunities. When you look at the extractives, what's been promised, we haven't had a high impact project across the line since about 2007-9, the early 2000s. There have been, there's certainly conflict. There's whichever way you look at a macroeconomic, or when you're looking at family well-being and just households. There is, again, such diversity. There is such disparity in wealth. There is such, there are so many challenges for why we should have already fallen down. But I think these independence, this last independence celebrations really reminded us that this has happened in our lifetimes. From we've got, people, a young woman flying an Airbus 200 from the other side of the world to, from a time when I know that the generation of my father would have struggled to actually communicate with other parts of the country, given, our linguistic diversity. So, in a nutshell, when you just look, our biggest opportunity, I think, is our 15 to 35 exponential population growth will actually leave us on our knees if we're not careful. But I think we're processing it as an opportunity, and that basically means that we're producing about 200,000 people a year, which is the equivalent of, or the basis for why we create new districts, in PNG. So I think I might leave it there. We've run a great risk of need to go on.
Well, on that, with youth participation and with economic participation and the opportunities that are there for you, what do you see, can extend that on these type of opportunities?
Well, the most important thing is that the world has come to us recently. In the last maybe 3 years, we've had heads of government, heads of state. The interest in our region has been both geostrategic and of course, geoeconomic, geopolitical. And we have a great opportunity with our current system of government. I think we could really be looking at some reforms that might change the nature of the rule of law, the underpinnings of the Westminster system that define engagement in the country. But I think that, certainly in 2025 and moving forward, we've had some, trickles of good news that just in the last couple of weeks, with potentially final investment decision for Total in Papua New Guinea, where there's also, some big concerns, macroeconomic concerns that we're facing at the moment, with the potential of going onto the grey list, or the reality of going onto the grey list in a very, very short period of time. But going back to your question on the opportunities for youth, I think the fact that we are geostrategically placed means that, and with all the resource wealth that we have, and the protections of land and sea that our people have, the high-level constitutional protections, the makings of the potential for our youth to do incredibly well, given the right political will, given, the importance of electoral reforms. We have another election coming up in less than 2 years now. And we've had local government elections that are really keen to define for us where our challenges sit, and where the opportunities are. But there have been certain initiatives. Our economy has the potential to move. I'm speaking very carefully here. Has the potential to move in a direction with 4 high impact projects around the corner to be able to use the greatest resource that we have, and that is our youth. But technology is going to make, it possible for our young to be able to access education in a way that we've never been able to do before. We have the opportunity to work remote, to study remote, conduct commerce remote. I think COVID taught us how to unlearn the way we communicate with the rest of the world. So I think there are great opportunities there, and in 18 months' time, hopefully, a change will come.
Sure. Diana was just talking about like opportunities, like it's PNG location. In terms of the current resources going around about signing of the what are you expecting?
Yeah, no, that's another good question, already. Thank you. And I think, like Dawson's point about, there's a lot of people visiting PNG recently who are international leaders. There's a lot more strategic interest, as we know, in Papua New Guinea. Probably the most I've seen and read a lot of Sean's stuff from literally the late 70s through to now. But there's an element of strategic interest in New Guinea that we haven't seen. One of the things I was just blown away by under previous President Biden and the Biden White House was Vice President Kamala Harris. And then in terms of briefing with it, that was something I talked about a lot in terms of what a better strategic signal to send to Papua New Guinea or Pacific Islands than doing something like that. That was remote, it wasn't in person, but these sort of strategic nods are very unusual, especially for a nation like Papua New Guinea. But I think the important distinction to make is that PNG, like any other democracy, is working between its interests and its values. And I think PNG leaders and PNG can do both. So it has strategic interests with, let's be clear, Beijing economic interests, but it's also got values as well, which I do think at the end of the day, and I'm probably a bit more forthright on this than other writers, but at the end of the day, PNG has values that are aligned with the United States, with Britain, with France, a lot of the Western democracies, and of course with Australia, with Trevor. That is just simply, in my view, validating something that we already know already. It's very important, but at the same time, I think PNG is just moving between values and interests like any other democracy, and that's something I think to be optimistic about. But it's just something I think that is just a good frame, strategic landscape of us.
Going to showing on PNG values.
PNG values.
What's your thoughts?
Unfortunately, I think they differ from province to province. Look, I think that the fact that the country is now 50 years old has shown that there's a real resilience about Papua New Guinea that some skeptics might have doubted many years ago. I just think it's the most fascinating country on earth, and I'm absolutely delighted that I got to spend so much of my journalistic career reporting on the place. Even though at one stage Dulcie's father threw me out. That was over troubles relating to the Irian-Jaya border. I was accused of having broken the law by crossing over into Irian-Jaya by interviewing one of the Irian-Jaya rebels, or having enticed a foreign citizen to enter Papua New Guinea illegally. So, yeah, we had to leave PNG, but terrifically, Papua New Guinea invited me back a few years later, and then I spent another 12 years there as the ABC correspondent. And as I said, it's the most extraordinary country on earth.
Oh,
Unfortunately, when I did get deported, my wife Pauline from Manus had to accept leaving her own country, which fortunately was reversed after a few years.
Yeah, PNG values, like one of the things we hold strong to is hospitality and our care for anyone who is related by kin or connection. That's really strong. It's you could say like it's a paradox in itself in a way. So Dalsiana, despite having opinion and this diversity of values, it's our democracy kind of product, and on the one hand, there are gaps as well, weaknesses we have here. What have been the challenges expected for PNG?
Chief amongst them, depending on where you are, that question gets answered differently. And certainly in each of the urban centres and every one of the provinces, but a very Waiganian, Moresby-centric view sort of dominates, I think, in a lot of assessments that are made about PNG. But I think that, with the onset of technology and the speed at which it has, I guess, the attraction and the uptake in urban areas. And we mustn't forget that these are, decentralisation programs have subnational institutional capacity is very, very different to what happens in Ghana, obviously, Moresby. And so I think, when you think about what challenges are, we've got 5 generations or potentially 6 or 7 generations of Papua New Guineans who still identify with their provincial areas but have never actually been home. That poses a problem in very many ways. Chief amongst them is in an electoral sense. When people go home to vote, so they make decisions about leadership in subnational areas where they don't live. And largely it's the wealthy that are doing that. So we're about to enter into an election economy again in about 2026. It'll start, the fun and games will start. And so we're seeing a skewing of what the realities are. People don't know what's, a lot of people will probably never see the inside of a classroom in some of the urban and peri-urban areas, and then of course in rural areas where we don't have wharves and jetties and feeder roads or provincial highways. So the disparities. So going back to your question about unity and democracy and PNG's version of it, I think our aspirations are very, very clear, and they've been very, very well defined at independence as the decades of the waves of democracy have taken place in PNG. I think urbanisation and then modernisation, Christianisation. The big one is we have no longer dealing with our basic Christian denominations. We're dealing with high levels of fundamentalism that no longer represent who our ancestors of our parents' generation were, but they completely don't sort of align with who our Indigenous beliefs and ancestors were. So every day we're either sitting under a flag or an artificial political boundary. The fact that we've got double-barrel electorates is highly problematic because in the first place our people should never have been separated in that as well. So language groups were separated. People intermarriage was broken. And unless we track it and place more prominence on education and our own history, all of these, because we're an oral society, these important links and the understanding of all of these interventions and the systems that we adopted will be very confused with our own ancient Indigenous ways. And I think we're struggling in some parts of Papua New Guinea with sorcery, with confusion and misinterpretation about our societal beliefs, the place of women in society, just highly problematic, and the list goes on. I think I'll leave it there.
There's a lot of translation work that we do as Papua New trying to navigate between our indigenous ways of doing communities, we could say, and like the Western influence on us as well. That leads me to like this future that we are envisioning at the thing of the future and seeing our place in the region again. And the way that we not only see ourselves, but think about that protecting again our national interests and our values. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think there's probably, it kind of moves between a couple of things. I mean, Ian Camish's here, you'll remember when I started writing on PNG 15 years ago, one of the first bits I published was on PNG in the Asian sector. This is a time, I think, Ian, you were starting your High Commission role in 2011, I think, or 2010. This is even Australia in the Asian century. There's a lot of optimism around Asia, where PNG could go, a lot of economic growth, and I think that's a very good thing to focus in on in terms of a national interest that motivates people at entrepreneurial and a local level as well. But then also at the same time, I think, you know, the culture has a very strong role to play and obviously has always in Papua New Guinea, but every other globalised nation confronts this challenge between how hard do you hold on to culture and then how hard do you run up economic growth and livelihoods and lifting living standards. And it's a tension. It's probably more, it's always been seen as a zero-sum thing, but I think every other nation, though, that's confronted this can balance both of those things as well. And, you know, it's been done in PNG. It's not like it's a laboratory experiment. There's lots of Papua New Guineans that are very successful, who live very entrepreneurial lives, very globalised, very cosmopolitan. And there's also people that you never hear of at the local level who are doing very well from an economic globalised perspective, who are doing excellent, but also and everyone maintains some element of culture. But that's really important, of course. But it's kind of this balance where I don't think it's always a zero-sum tension. I think the last sort of, you know, I think we're talking about pace, but, you know, if you just look at the history of globalisation, especially since the, you know, late 90s, there's been this balance or this tension. But I think, again, PNG has not been a lab experiment. Lots of Papua New Guineans are doing it. And there's some really fantastic examples we probably don't talk too much about. But, and so I think that probably speaks to your, you know, the question around that tension between becoming, you know, a national interest, cultural interest, economic growth and development, etc. But yeah, I think that's something to be optimistic about PNG and how it's balanced that among a lot of Papua New Guineans. Yeah.
Well, you did mention women and women's roles in society, especially in this time of the leadership of capacity. Could you speak more about women?
We, you know, again, our experience is largely based on a Port Moresby experience or urban experiences. And if we're talking about, look, if we just look at the private sector in PNG and the public sector, women in public sector have been doing leadership extremely well, you know, bound by important governance frameworks, you know, transparency, all the important features of you know, well-meaning and successful progressive modern society. There is a huge difference in the public sector and certainly in women in political leadership. Within that, I think we tend to, when we make assessments, we sort of look at an electoral system and we look at representation of women in parliament, and we're siloing conversations when, importantly, right from the time a girl child is being raised in a house with a boy child, we can see that culturally mothers are giving prominence to boy children, making sure that they're fed better, they get priority where there's poverty. They have access to education. So there's a disparity that begins in the home before we get to, even to public life. And I think what we're doing, I stood in two elections, and when I think of it now, I can't believe that I've made those decisions. But when I look back, we're not proposing enough to the electorate and to women and to young men. But we should all be cutting our teeth at local level, and look at the municipal arrangement. Become interested in becoming the president of the local government. First of all, understand definitionally what you're putting your hand up. We'll go back from 2022. We had over 6,000 candidates for 118 seats. Many of whom, in a bicameral system, where there is only a single house. Many of whom don't understand the limitations of a district, the importance of a province and the mechanisms that drive it, the importance of internal revenue, just the features of the Westminster system that we adopted. And I think with social media now, and the craziness around the 24-hour feeding the monster, there's a dump of sensationalism of all sorts of other features, both good and bad. And in the past, when information was exclusive, people knew what to do with information and how to process it and on what terms. And I think that when you're throwing lots of information that's unfettered, if you like, people don't know what to do with that information. And who are the minorities and who are the weakest? Well, it's women. And I think that when I've gone to the most remote, and I've travelled around the country lots of times now in the last 10 years, there is a huge disparity, and access to technology, access to information is largely powered by men who are both the heads of our cultural system, the majority. There are, of course, matrilineal exceptions, and of course, men who are also sitting at the heads of our political system. So, to cut a very long story short, I think that hopefully by 2026, people are getting more used to seeing women lead. People are getting more used to seeing women in rugby shorts, for whatever their commentary is, for whatever the nastiness is, the misogyny, the awful, awful commentary. The fact that it's out there and people have an opportunity to process it and to read, social media is, I think, misunderstood by the government of the country. And the threats to shut it down, the threats to kind of, stifle the voice of the important features of our democracy. And I think that you can see the patterns starting to shift now with people reading other people's comments and learning in a way where we're just getting used to this new normal.
You mentioned women in football. Is that a growing thing in PNG?
I really like this is a democratic, really democratic part of our society that's emerging.
Yeah.
And women, it's an opportunity. So it's an opportunity to be a part of a club, to show commitment, to show the commitment in sport. And it's been endorsed by corporates. It's been supported by INGOs, NGOs, civil society. The major denominations in our faith-based organisations are getting right behind the women in sport.
Right.
And it's a growing trend. We're improving. We could certainly do better, but we're improving.
Opportunity. Just have 3 minutes to go for the panel. If you have anything else you'd like to add.
If we get on the sporting issue, I must say, my greatest achievement in life was to captain the Commonwealth. I played for the Commonwealth for 2 years, and the last time was against a visiting New South Wales countryside, and we had a vote as to who should be captain. Much to my delight, but also embarrassment. The rest of the Commonwealth voted me to be the captain. So it was something I gladly accepted, but with some humility.
Information and its importance and evidence and data, I think is that we've got and as we move forward in absolutely every sector. All of our agreements in fisheries, our agreements in forestry, all the levies that are imposed on at subnational, and we can't build infrastructure, we can't keep going, and we can't just be standing in the dark while we're trying to run a country or to build a country or to rebuild a country. And I think information and data is so important. We've got 8 new districts apparently. The capacity in Parliament is only 131. And when those seats run out, I mean, it's apart from the physical nature of the shift that has to happen now in this unicameral system, the reality is that we don't have the capacity for more districts. At this stage, districts are sharing district development authorities. The NEFC isn't involved in the underpinning of these decisions. The NSO, we haven't had census since 2011. We've household income surveys. We don't know if we've updated the common law. We don't know if we've updated the electoral law. So information and data and its access and use is really important.
Just a very brief point that sort of builds on those two in particular. But just I think when we look at PNG's places of democracy historically, when PNG is a very messy democracy, there's a lot of stuff going on that's actually quite, that we can be optimistic about, that we can be very concerned about. But the important thing I think to note at 50 years is that if it's the reverse for democracies, when they stagnate, when there's no openness, when there's no economic growth, when there's no churn, when they're not messy anymore, that's a cause for concern and a greater concern than all the challenges that the country is confronting at the moment. So I think that's just a point to I always sort of try and consider PNG in its historical context, and it's just important to just factor into all discussions as well.
Thank you. Now open the floor to any questions from the audience.
About probably 2 questions now. Maybe one might sound controversial. Yes. You talked about the opportunities for youth, and that's the biggest resource for PNG. Are the youth aware of that they have the opportunity? Is there a desire in the youth to take up those opportunities? That's question 1. And 2 is, you also said about the values of PNG that is being, if I understood you right, is being covered by the Christian religion kind of a thing. So if the value puts a woman down, then where does the woman's rising come up if Christianity doesn't come into play?
Well, I wish you hadn't asked me those questions. So that was to your first question. Again, we're struggling with almost across the country, 100 students. The ratio of teachers to students is very, very, there's a huge anomaly, 88 to 100 students in one classroom with one teacher. We're building classrooms where there are no roads, where, we're not stocking pharmaceuticals in the hospitals. We're not building enough level 4 hospitals. And the ones we've got, while appropriations are being made, the funds aren't reaching. So health and education, healthy, unhealthy youth, and with very little opportunity in the outlying areas, is essentially creating a powder keg. But we're very, very fortunate in that we still largely live in our areas of where historically. So you're looking at our modern history, so to speak, with the families that moved, like block families. the indentured labour that moved out to different places, so that creates a different dynamic. I'm just giving you one or two examples. So, you know, my people, there's lots of civic people that live in Western Britain, and they all moved out there, you know, very, very early on. And they again would be third and fourth generation families. So there's all sorts of tension. So, you know, while we can talk about youth in and of themselves, influences on the youth, the experiences of the youth, the access to finance models. So we've got high-level aspirations like MSMEs, SMEs. We're talking about incubation in space technology to all the way up to, you know, tech, you know, lots of STEM. There's interest in STEM recently, but the follow-through and the throughput is still lacking. So we understand where the nodes are, we think, you know, but a concentration of hemorrhaging. We've got a black economy that's bigger than the formal economy, and this is highly problematic. And so the folk that are always going to fall through the cracks are going to be women and youth. And until such time as we have the frank conversation about the fact that there's a lot of unbanked money, there's a lot of money being printed that's illegal, there's lots and lots of things that are going on that we really need to stare in the face, call it something, and deal with it. At the moment, we're reacting to symptoms, in my view. As to the question of women and modern Christian movements, I guess, again, you know, we're seeing other non-Christian denominations emerge. So there's a big Muslim following, particularly in the Simple and the Highlands regions. The Christian denominations, you know, our traditional ones, you know, again, in the absence of adequate data and information, contracting more than they're expanding, we're seeing. So I guess how do you call it? The instant gratification, I guess. And I've got to be careful because I'll get criticised for speaking like a Catholic now. But I think that, yeah, the emergence of and so we haven't been able to get our heads around, you know, the newness of the following of the emergence of the new, you know, and I'm reluctant to name any. But yeah, so if we're dealing with all our adopted systems, you know, pre-independence, post-independence, and now there's another wave. So we can chat about this.
Thank you.
I have a youth question about education. Just out of curiosity, education in the curriculum in PNG, is PNG history being taught? That's my question.
I don't know a lot about the current education.
Vanessa, the appetite is certainly there now, and that's such a good thing. You know, and as we celebrated independence and we saw young, old, brand new little people get in amongst the excitement of what this flag means. Like, we've got these stars on the flag. What's the yellow bird doing? You know, what are the colours? There's, I think, immediately before this period, there was this inertia, and we weren't investing in the importance of who we are and on what terms we're doing. I think progress has been the trigger. Excitement of, oh gosh, you know, we're all, you know, so many people are going away. The diaspora is huge. The remittance is great. The connections kind of seem to be broken, and then they seem to find this incredible way of finding all its way back together. But the appetite is certainly there now for our history to be understood. I was really excited because people were unpacking, young people have been unpacking, what's this bully been about? You know, how old was your father when he started to fight independence? You know, wasn't he scared of the white people? You know, all these really, really important questions that hopefully we can document, you know, and now that information is no longer exclusive, I think more people hopefully can document it. I hope that answers your question, Liz.
In Sir Julius Chan's autobiography, he talks about the fact that in Papua New Guinea, the party system is very fluid. And I'm just wondering, do you think that will change, or do you think that there will always be what he says is that it mature as it did here in Australia? But do you think that will change in the future, or do you think that there will always be this fluidity in politics in Papua New Guinea?
Slippery slope.
I'm going to have fun, take a run of it, but maybe sure you want.
Oh,
Yeah.
You'd like to think that the party system will sort of stabilise and get stronger, but it's such a diverse country. You need some more charismatic leaders like Sir Michael to sort of unify, people in the country. That it's, that is a really tough question as to how do you get around making, the country progress in a very positive way. I mean, just bewildering.
Yeah, fair enough. And look, just building on Sean's point, I think I don't want to be cynical here, but probably the fluidity is not going to change anytime soon. What I think, though, that to be optimistic about PNG about is, I think about this as like think about a stadium, right? And that's our Westminster institution. So the teams are all fluid, everyone's moving, changing jerseys, doing all bits and pieces. But the stadium has been pretty rock solid since '75, and that's probably the fundamental kind of rock. That won't change, I don't think, anytime soon. But the teams will still be quite fluid for the foreseeable future, I think, anyway. But it's the team versus the arena kind of thing. I think the arena is the institutions in PNG, and that'll stay solid, at least in my view, and fundamental. But I don't see the. And look, let's think about this too, because once parties get more, if PNG went to a two, but look at what's happening in Australia now as a more mature, more, democracy. It's becoming more fragmented as well. So it becomes this cycle, right, as a democracy. I think that's what we need to look at PNG as a democracy in its historical context as well. Because it eventually, democracies come back to this fragmentation at political parties where PNG is at the moment. So it'll evolve, of course, but then, think about this if we were having this discussion in 100 years' time, I don't think we'll move on from PNG's Westminster institutions, but the political parties will probably be solid, but they might be fragmented again. So, just my call.
I think we've had, during what we saw in a very recent period, the legendary Sir Makere Marata introduced some massive reforms that really changed the nature of our politics and provided relative political stability for the ensuing Prime Minister to follow the reforms enough to, first of all, get an important high-impact project across the line, which was PNG LNG. And so in our lifetimes and in very recent times, so it was a reform that said that, the organic law of political parties. So, you were bound by, you had to vote for the constitutional amendment, you had to vote for the budget. And, the invitation went to the leader of the political party with the largest number post-election. Our elections are now, we've moved from first past the post to the limited preferential. And an analogy, the only analogy to really describe it is, where there's, like water. If there's a leak in the tank, it'll find its way out. And this is the issue that we're facing. We found the weaknesses in first past the post, and we played on those, and we found the weaknesses. Now we found the weaknesses in a limited preferential system, and we're playing to those weaknesses. And again, in a unicameral system, if the people that if we don't have the basis for a leveler, or what are the requisite conditions for you to be able to put your hand up? A taxi driver needs a license. A surgeon needs to train for 12 years. Why, when you're running a country in my country, don't you need a qualification? And so, that perhaps is the starting point if we're talking about change, because we don't know what a middle bench is, the difference between executive government and the legislature, the importance of the judiciary, the separation of powers, all those are the important underpinning, because we tend to forgive. So the kangaroo court will say that, oh no, he's a big person, he's a leader. And then all of a sudden, we're forgiving the most unforgivable, incidents of just breaches of our system. That I think that we really need to look and understand what the original system is about in order to correct it, and in order for us not to make the mistakes of the past. And do we preserve it? With Bougainville putting its hand up and moving in the direction that it's going, there's a bigger craft, more autonomy with other, seemingly self-sustaining provinces. So yes, hopefully change will come. But yeah, that's a lot of moving parts.
Last question. Thank you. Sean, I think you were the one that mentioned the international sort of recognition of Papua New Guinea as this new sort of hub, and there has been so much more attention and I guess more heads of government visiting. I'd be interested to hear the panel's reflections on development partners over the last 50 years and the role they have played in Papua New Guinea, and how they could or perhaps should engage differently in the next 50 years, what you see in the future.
I'm happy to throw you guys and then I can maybe I'll go. Fair point. I think look, having worked in this space a little bit and over the years, I think there's a lot obviously on central government support, etc. But there's also a lot of stuff going on at the local level that we probably don't quite appreciate as well, like small operators that have mini grants programs that operate in villages that you just would never hear about, that don't make the post courier, don't make the national, but are making many bits of change as well. So international institutions do a great job. But I remember when I worked for Lord Mayor Graham Clark and I was the senior advisor for the environment for the parks. The Brisbane City Council spends more on its parks every year than the entire Australian aid budget. Not Indonesia and PNG combined, but like $500 million, right? So it's like you think about that, and it's like how can an amount of money like that make any difference? And understood it's going into Waigani, it's going out to. There's a lot of leakage, as we know. We can talk about that, but I think we need to just think about this from the other perspective, where there's a lot of things that we think about a top-down solution for things, but there's a lot of really good stuff going on that we just don't see, we never read about, we never hear about, with small injections of grant money from a lot of smaller operators that operate that we can probably learn a lot from as well. So yeah, I think it's probably a half-answered question, but with just how things have gone, I learned a lot from Sean's, his first book in terms of how things have worked at a national level, provincial level, local government level, back to national level where things are at the moment. And it's kind of this portion at the moment with farming out too much stuff to provincial and local level, because it got tried in the late 80s, early 90s. It was like, oh gosh, this is actually really quite risky. And so there's probably a risk thing that's probably cycled up to international institutions that are very cautious about lending too much money at local level. So yeah, that's probably those are my probably two. Yeah.
Emma, I guess the most visible of ours is and in more recent times, of course, China. And I think, there's it's not so much a quandary as a lot of confusion by Papua New Guineans, as recipients. I don't think as citizenry we're aware of what is concessional borrowing, what is grant, and so on and so forth. I think very significantly, if we're to define where the most important investments are to go, we will define our foreign policy. We will make it very clear that we won't be putting up with parallel systems. we won't be, paying lip service to the importance of national content and local content and the important features of our legislative and regulatory spaces that aspirationally say Papua New Guineans need to be upskilled and Papua New Guineans and the development quandary is actually the responsibility of host government, as we all know. And, in the absence of the presence of host government in so many places, I'm an advisor to Total and, travelling up and down on Papua PNG and travelling up and down to remote areas, all the way up to the main Perth base. And the question constantly is in the Gulf province, why isn't the developer doing more? Why isn't Total doing more without actually fully understanding? And it's because there's been a complete absence of government. And so people are now, so the new kid on the block is going to be, is being henpecked about, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you building more classrooms and so on and so forth? So going back to the question, I think that it is the responsibility of our host government to understand and to allow the flexibility in our foreign policy to acknowledge that we are of interest to the world. And, everyone, to the Taiwanese who want semiconductors from us, and we've got the capacity, but that's about our own internal development frameworks and economic and trade cooperation, so a whole raft of things. Don't get me started.
50 years is not really a big time. In the last 50 years now, it started. That is just at the beginning.
Well, that brings us to the end of this panel.
Let's gather here another 50 years. What's there?
That brings us to the end of our panel. Can we all give a round of applause?
I'm Graham Kerridge. I'm the Secretary of AIIA Queensland. And I, like all of you, I'm sure, are extraordinarily grateful for this panel that has been assembled tonight. And particularly thanks to my colleague Tess for facilitating recruitment of the panel. So thank you enormously to all of you. And as some of you will be aware, we like to honour and thank our panel members by offering you a year's membership of AIIA. So we hope to get you back to several events.
Thank you.
Now, October is actually a very important month for anniversaries. Firstly, for the PNG anniversary, and secondly, next week we have a talk for the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. And there we will have Professor Susan Harris-Rimmer giving her fellows address on multilateralism at peril. So that will be a fascinating one for all of us who have been very concerned about what is happening in the wider geopolitical domain. Now, and this is a challenge for all of us, we are in the process of moving our venues. And next week's event will actually be at the premises of Thomson Greer on level 28 at Waterfront Place. Now, that is on the notice that's gone out, but please be aware of that. It's not going to be here next week. It's a wonderful venue, and we're immensely grateful for that. So I hope that many of you will get along for that talk. We will be sending out notices on other events, and I don't want to go beyond next week because that's going to be such a challenge to get everyone there rather than turning up here. But please be very conscious of the changes of events, venues that come out on the emails. So once again, thank you very much for coming along and sharing this very special occasion because PNG is very much a close partner for Queensland as the gateway for Australia to PNG. And there are many of the PNG community here in Brisbane, and there are many Australians here in Brisbane who have a close affiliation to PNG as well. So thank you very much for sharing this event.